The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Sold, thank you very much.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
This is it.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Oh my goodness.
Every case is packed with surprise and intrigue.
Is it, or isn't it a Freud then?
But not every painting is quite what it seems.
Gosh, why didn't I notice that before?
It's a journey that can end in joy.
There is enough to support the conclusion that it is by Tom Roberts.
Or bitter disappointment.
I don't think it's a work by Gauguin. I'm very sorry.
This time, we're looking at an 18th century portrait of a young man in the prime of his life.
He's dashing. He's not my type. But,
Could a chance sighting by Philip have revealed an undiscovered work by the giant of Regency portraiture, Sir Thomas Lawrence?
I'm going to have to prove somehow that this image is what I think it is.
But this family's portrait's been passed down the generations as a painting by the pioneering female artist Mariah Causeway, a name to which the family are very attached.
You still need a bit more convincing, don't you?
yes.
The investigation will take us to some of the grandest homes in the country. We'll look for clues in the picture itself.
That's taking us in a bit more of a Lawrenthian direction.
But the paperwork tells another story.
Cosway is mentioned here. Lawrence is not.
Which way will the evidence stack up? Cosway or Lawrence?
I mean, it really does change the game.
Completely.
Yeah.
There's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
We're starting our investigation in central London and are on our way to meet the Cecil family. They have a family portrait which went unquestioned for centuries, until Philip set eyes on it.
So last summer, when I went to visit them, I saw on their back wall a beautiful painting, which I think is by the great portrait painter Sir Thomas Lawrence. But they think that it's by someone called Mariah Causeway.
So again, they're on one of your hunches then?
Well, what's wrong with that?
We'll find out.
Philip's built a whole career on exactly this kind of hunch, but it's always a delicate game. Now the Cecils are looking at their family portrait in a different light and have asked us to investigate. We're meeting Clem Cecil and her mother Mirabelle, and I'm keen to see this puzzling picture for myself.
Aha.
So here it is.
So here he is, yes.
Well, I can see why it caught your eye, Philip. I think it's gorgeous. What do you think, Mirabelle?
Well, I do think it's glamorous and full of colour.
But he's romantic, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's dashing. He's not my type. But,
But look at that face. That
Yes.
is
it's
lovely.
full of life, isn't it?
The portrait is of the aristocrat Penistone Lamb II. He's a distant relative of the Cecils, and the picture has been hanging quietly on the family's walls, passed down the generations, until quite by chance, Philip spotted it across a crowded room.
I remember coming through the door and then seeing on the back wall what, to me, looked like a blindingly good work by Thomas Lawrence.
Well, you saw it rather than me, because I was standing there welcoming you, and you said, "Good evening," and went straight across the room in a straight line, like an arrow.
Welcome to
the
my
picture.
world, Mirabelle.
There is a reason why I couldn't resist this picture. Sir Thomas Lawrence is one of my favourite artists, and if there's even a sniff of one, I can't help but follow the scent. Born in 1769, Lawrence was a child prodigy who went on to become a titan of British portraiture. His pictures captured the glamour and the dazzle of Regency England, presenting the fashionable elite in a brilliantly new and direct way. But the Cecils believe their portrait is by a contemporary of Lawrence, Mariah Causeway.
What makes you think that it is by Cosway? What evidence have you got as suggested by her?
Well, we've got this inventory, which was taken at my parents-in-law's house, where it hung, by William Wallace of Salisbury. Which
a recognised auctioneer.
And this was when? When was this done?
1986.
1986.
Yeah. And there it is.
Mariah Causeway, portrait of Penistone Lamb, circa 1780. And a value here, £4,000.
Yeah.
So, do we know why they attributed this to Mariah Causeway at the time?
It was just always
said
to be by her.
Mariah Causeway was a pioneering female artist. During her career, she exhibited over 30 pictures at the Royal Academy. She was known for her mythological paintings, but also painted commissioned portraits. Today, the whereabouts of much of her work is unknown, so having a portrait by her is quite a coup for the Cecils.
If we were going to talk relative values of this painting, if it's Lawrence or Cosway, what would we be looking at?
If this were by Cosway, well, it would be worth perhaps £4,000, £5,000, £6,000, £7,000, £8,000. If this could be pinned to what I think would have to be the young Lawrence, given that it's such an exceptional work in such exquisite condition, I could see it being worth, prepare yourself for this, up to about £300,000.
Gosh, just a lot, isn't it?
And how will you feel about it if it turns out to be a Lawrence?
Well, it's exciting to know. I'd like to know either way, to be honest, because it's going to stay in the family, I sincerely hope.
The family's ties with this painting go back hundreds of years. The sitter, Penistone Lamb, is a distant relative. Penistone lived at the end of the 18th century. His family were also known by their title, Melbourne. They were right at the heart of high society, connected to royalty, and one brother, Lord Melbourne, even became Prime Minister to Queen Victoria. The painting is believed to have passed down through the family to Mirabell's husband, Hugh, through his grandmother, Alice, Marchioness of Salisbury. Unfortunately, Hugh is very frail, but I'm hoping he can shed some light on his distant ancestor.
That must have been done when he was about 16 or 17, and when he was a dashing young man.
He looks to me like a dandy of his day.
Yes, I think he was. He wasn't a romantic character. He was interested in gambling.
So he was a bit of a wastrel, was he?
Yes.
I'm taking a proper look at Penistone now, and wondering if what I saw from a distance will be as compelling up close.
I mean, the first thing that is so, I think, rather miraculous, actually, about this picture is that sense of frozen movement. I mean, his mouth is slightly open, almost as if he's talking. The head is looking away, as if there's some offstage action. I mean, this is realism. This is different from so many artists of the period, where portraits can be rather stolid and static. It's almost like a still from a film. There are areas like this really complex piece of drawing, something after my own heart, a really good scarf or necktie. But it's so brilliantly expressed by these halftones. You can almost, with your eye, follow it through and work out how the knot might work. I mean, this is something that's so sophisticated, something that's so ahead of the game. I mean, it must be, to my eye, a work by Thomas Lawrence.
And if, as Philip rather hopes, it's by Lawrence, what will you think of that?
I'd wish it luck. I think Cosway is pretty good, so I don't think it's a great dishonour to be attributed to her.
Not at all.
No.
My hunch tells me that this picture is by Thomas Lawrence, but that's not sufficient on its own to impress the experts, particularly without hard facts. You also can't discount the fact that for many generations, this has been called a work by Mariah Causeway, an artist I know far less well than Thomas Lawrence.
So, to start our investigation, I want to take a closer look at Mariah Causeway's work. Luckily for us, this means a trip to one of Britain's most spectacular stately homes. Chatsworth House in Derbyshire is the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire's family seat. and in the late 18th century, Mariah Causeway's greatest patron lived here. One of Cosway's most celebrated works is a portrait of her, and today it hangs proudly in Chatsworth. Mirabelle is joining Fiona and me to take a look. Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Mariah Causeway has depicted her as a Greek goddess.
It's so dramatic. I mean, it's like she's hurtling out of the heavens towards us.
Yes.
Well, actually, which to be fair, is what she's probably literally doing, because this is Diana the Huntress. She had a soft spot, Mariah Causeway, for the dressing up box.
I mean, not bad. If you wanted to be preserved, Mirabelle, I mean, being preserved as a goddess hurtling out of the skies
out of space.
is
Yes.
pretty good. I love it.
Yes, so do I.
Unfortunately, this portrait is badly damaged. The paint has cracked, resulting in a leathery finish. But can we see through this to compare it to Penistone Lamb?
The all-important technique, I think, is radically at variance to yours. I mean, look at the way that the drapery is done, particularly top right. You've got that flowing piece of, well, I want to say it's robe, but it's sort of half hair, half rags, half something.
Yes.
It's a bit harsh. It's not that bad. I mean, it's just a sort of gauzy material, isn't it?
Well, it is, but this worries me in the way that yours doesn't. The way that necktie, that serpentine way, goes around Penistone's neck.
But in a way, you're comparing chalk with cheese, because one is an actual portrait of a person, the other is a goddess hurtling out of space.
But it's meant to be Georgiana, isn't it? Yes.
But she's very glamorous, and Penistone is quite glamorous. But it's got the same colour of the cheeks, the sparkle in the eye, the half-open mouth.
Yeah, I see your point. I see your point.
A sort of very lively gaze. The background of the Penistone was so lowering with the storm clouds. And this is a sort of comparable palette, isn't it?
It's a very dramatic sky,
yes.
that's for sure.
You still need a bit more convincing, don't you?
Yes.
You stick to your guns, Mirabelle. I love it. You go for it. I mean, I have to say, personally, I'm turning away from Mariah Causeway, you know, but looking at this. But I love the fact that you're not, so come on.
I'm fighting the family's
You
corner
should,
here.
you've got to do a bit more work, Philip.
I think that the lady's not for turning.
Well, we'll see. Not yet.
I hadn't expected Mirabelle to be quite so attached to this idea of the painting being by Mariah Causeway, I must admit. But then, you know, Hugh has lived with this painting all his life, and we're now questioning its very identity. It would be wonderful if it is by a pioneering female artist. But on the other hand, what a coup if we reveal an undiscovered portrait by the great Thomas Lawrence.
Back in London, I've brought the painting to my gallery, and I found a number of clues to share with Fiona. Unfortunately, not all of them help my case.
So now you've got your hands on it, is there anything basic to go on, like a signature or a date?
No, but actually that's not a problem, because Lawrence rarely signs an oil painting. It's other things that are going to lead us, with any luck, into a Lawrenthian direction. Things like the fashion, and possibly some forensic details as well.
And what about on the back? Is there anything on the back?
There is, and you may want to have a look.
I do want to have a look. Any reason why I shouldn't have a look?
Have a look.
Philip is obviously very hesitant. I can see straight away there are some old-looking labels. Right, so this... Viscountess Jocelyn. So that's good for provenance.
Yeah, it gives us a name and a good old label as well.
Yeah. There's another label which is almost indistinguishable. It looks like her name, and I can just about make out an E and A. And there's a third label. Oh. Cosway Loan Exhibition, 1895. So it says Cosway.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that, and I'm sure we'll be able to account for it somewhere or another, but yes, this painting that I think is by Lawrence has got an old label on the back that says Cosway.
Which is a bit inconvenient, isn't it, really?
It is a bit, but I'm not going to be put off by this.
Philip may not be deterred, but this is another clue pointing to Cosway. I want to see if I can find any more evidence to link her to the picture. And I don't have far to go. Back in the 1780s, Mariah and her husband, fellow artist Richard Cosway, would have been Philip's neighbours. They lived at the fashionable address Schomberg House on Pall Mall. I've come to a cafe around the corner to meet historian Diane Boucher, who's researched Cosway's life. So here we are in Mariah Causeway's old stomping ground, Pall Mall.
Yes.
Tell me back to the beginning of her life, because she was born in Florence, wasn't she?
Yes, she was, in 1760. Her parents were both English. Her father had gone to Italy and opened inns, but they were very sort of high-class inns, and they catered for the British aristocracy to come on the grand tour.
And were her family artistic?
No, but she says of her father that he believed very much in education, which was unusual for that time for a girl. A lot of artists stayed at a father's inn, and he managed to get them to give her lessons.
Mariah's father died in 1777. At the age of 18, she moved to London to seek fame and fortune as an artist.
She was fortunate that she had an introduction to Angelica Kauffman, who was the leading woman artist in Britain, a member of the Royal Academy, one of two women, and Angelica took her under her wing and invited her to spend time in her studio.
So she must have been recognised even then as a considerable talent.
Oh yes, and people speak about the fact how unusual that there should be not only a woman artist, but somebody who was also very acclaimed musician as well.
It was Mariah's musical talents that attracted the great and good of London society to the Cosway Salon at Schomberg House. She would compose and perform her own pieces and was known as the goddess of Pall Mall. It was here that she also won many of her painting commissions. She was living a gilded life here in Pall Mall. Would her circle of rather grand friends included the Lambs, the Melbournes?
Oh yes, absolutely. In fact, there's a very interesting diary entry that I found from 1786 by James Boswell's, where he goes with the Melbournes and the Cosways, and they go to Astley's Circus, and then they go back to the Cosways for supper afterwards. So they're very much all part of that circle.
Do we know if Mariah ever painted any of the Lamb family?
Yes, indeed, she did. She was commissioned in 1787 by Lady Melbourne to paint her son, George.
So this is George, the younger brother of Penistone Lamb.
This is
the picture that we're looking at.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's a very interesting clue,
yeah,
though,
and this
it?
is exhibited. This is exhibited.
And this is accepted as a Mariah Causeway?
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah.
Is it possible that she painted any of the other siblings?
Yes, it is possible, yes.
Likely?
Yes. I think it is likely, and I think Lady Melbourne and Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, would have tried to help women. Women artists, women playwrights, women poets. They were great patrons, and they tried to help women. And so, yes, I think it's very likely.
With Fiona on the Cosway Trail, the pressure's on to connect Lawrence with our Penistone portrait. And I'm starting at the National Gallery, where I have a royal appointment.
The key to understanding Lawrence is that he was a child prodigy. This man could paint as easily as most people can speak. I mean, this astonishing work was done when he was 20 years old. And it's none other than the Queen, Queen Charlotte. It wasn't easy painting the Queen. She didn't really like him, it appears. She would only give him one sitting. He needed more. But still, it is one of the great works of the period. People were wondering how on earth you could improve upon the works of people like Joshua Reynolds in the previous generation. Here was a man who just picked up his brush and hit the ground running. Every bit of this picture is full of movement and glamour. This is a really complex piece of painting. It actually looks familiar.
there are so many aspects of this portrait that resonate with ours. Both subjects look like they've been caught in mid-movement, animated, alert. Then there's the fabric and the dress and the scarf, strokes and highlights that navigate your eye through the twists and the folds. And then there's their hair. Both are turbulent with energy and realism.
I mean, what makes this a Lawrence is just the glamour. It's a clever picture. It's such a complex piece of painting for one so young. And it's so like Hugh and Mirabel's picture.
For me, the stylistic comparison is compelling. The next step is to take the portrait for technical analysis to see if science will back me up.
I'm heading to the Courtauld Art Library to continue my investigation into the Cosway attribution. Philip may argue the portrait is in Lawrence's style, but all the paperwork shows it's been considered a Cosway for a long time. The inventory the Cecils showed me takes the Cosway name back to 1986. The label on the frame takes it right back to 1895. It refers to an exhibition of Cosway pictures almost 60 years after Mariah's death and gives a catalogue number 276. I've been told the catalogue is here, and I'm keen to see if it will help us take the Cosway name back further still. Right, so here we have catalogue of miniatures, oil paintings, drawings and engravings by Richard Cosway and Mariah Causeway, his wife. Bingo. Now, the number we're looking for that is on the label on the back of our painting is 276. Oh, there's all sorts of paintings listed here, lent by the Honourable this and the Lord and Lady that. And they're generally miniatures. Of course, Richard Cosway was a renowned miniaturist at the time, and Mariah did some too. 276. Oh, several miniatures, the names of which will be seen on the respective labels. But there's no reference to our painting here, which I'm very puzzled by, because this is the right number, 276, and this is clearly the right exhibition. So that's rather frustrating. Lent by the Earl of Arran. Who is he? I'm wondering if that was the obscured name on the other label on the back of the frame. And as for the detail about what those pictures are of, it looks as if whoever put this catalogue together rather ran out of steam towards the end, because there's no detail about hardly anything here, just in the first pages. So I don't really know what to make of that, to be honest. On the positive side, we do have another name to add to the one we already had on the back of the picture, which was Viscountess Jocelyn. We've now got the Earl of Arran.
I'm heading out of London to Cambridgeshire in pursuit of some world-class technical expertise. I'm taking the portrait of Penniston to the Hamilton Carr Institute. It's Cambridge University's Centre for Painting Conservation. The staff and students are involved in scientific, technical and art historical research. Rupert Featherstone is the director, and he's worked on both Thomas Lawrence and Mariah Causeway portraits.
So, Rupert, I feel it deep in my waters that this is Lawrence, but I need your help. I mean, can you tell me anything about it from just looking at it?
Well, it's beautifully executed, isn't it? There's some lovely brushwork there. And it's a lovely state of preservation from what I can see. It looks like barely a crack in that.
I mean, the condition does feel so much better than your average portrait of this period.
Yeah, and that was often a failure of the artist's technique as much as anything else. That certain people, Reynolds notoriously, but others, experimented too much, and they were trying to get certain effects, and the materials didn't behave themselves, and over time the craquelure patterns developed, and you get alligator skin effects.
So could the condition of the portrait give away the hand that might have painted it?
Would you describe Lawrence as the sort of technician who produced pictures that are in a better state than average today?
He certainly took a lot of trouble over his paint, and a lot of trouble over how he applied the paint. So As a general rule, unless they've been terribly mistreated, the paintings by Lawrence that I've seen have been in an excellent condition.
So if one was to compare a work by Lawrence to someone like Mariah Causeway, I mean, do you know the Mariah Causeway at Chatsworth?
Yes. We worked on it some years ago, and that had suffered very badly from failures of technique, basically. The craquelure patterns were, well, it was like alligator skin, the poor woman. There's no sign of that sort of paint defect.
So its superb condition is itself an indicator of Lawrence rather than Cosway. A good sign, but far from conclusive.
Well, I'm longing to know what you can find out by looking deeper, looking through it and into it.
X-ray and infrared, that's the first step. So hopefully one of those will show us something that will give us more of a diagnosis, if that's the right word, or an attribution.
As I leave Penistone with Rupert and his team, I'm all too aware that the destiny of Penistone's attribution relies heavily upon their findings.
While Philip is making the case for Lawrence, I'm back on the road tracking down the provenance of the picture. We've got two names from the labels, Viscountess Jocelyn and the Earl of Arran. Usually we trace provenance through sales catalogues, but as far as we know, this portrait has always stayed in the family. So it's a case of following the family tree back to Penistone Lamb himself. And once again, our investigation gives us a glimpse into a bygone world of glamorous high society. Clem and I have come to Brocket Hall in Hertfordshire. Today, it's a golf club, but in the 1700s, it was one of the Lamb's family seats, and Penistone spent much of his childhood here.
Oh, this is lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So amidst all this splendour is where the man in your painting, Penistone Lamb, grew up. Who knows, his painting could well have hung on one of the walls here. This was just one of their homes, actually, the family homes. They had several around the country, and they moved in the most rarefied of Regency circles, so they were pretty grand. I mean, now you've looked at his painting a bit more closely, what kind of impression did you get of Penistone?
Well, the family legend about him is that he was a bit of a wastrel. And looking at the painting, I still feel that about him, actually. He doesn't look that bright, so it doesn't surprise me.
Maybe we're doing him a massive disservice, but certainly that was his reputation.
Yeah.
Now, Penistone was doted on by his father, and he was given £5,000 a year to live on, which in today's money is £500,000.
In today's money?
£500,000.
Okay.
And he spent it.
Penistone was an MP, but this was an age when the job usually came with the title. He barely went to Parliament and preferred to spend his time at the races. A contemporary account describes him as handsome and indolent. It goes on to say, he lived wholly amidst the amusements and dissipation of the world.
Sadly, though, his good time came to an end quite soon. I think you know that he died quite young.
Yes.
He died when he was 35.
Of consumption,
Of consumption or TB,
yeah,
which is a pretty horrible illness.
And did he ever marry or have children?
Didn't.
No.
He didn't. He was too busy having a big party, I think. So the question is, how did the painting come down through the years to you and your family? And I think I might be able to shed some light on that.
Normally, a collection of art belonging to an aristocratic family would stay together in the main family seat, passed down the male line. But in the case of the Lambs, this wasn't to be. I've been piecing together the family tree to work out how the portrait may have been inherited through the family.
So here we have your painting, Penistone,
Yes.
there he is, with his fabulous hair.
Yes.
So he was the son of Penistone Lamb, 1st Viscount Melbourne.
Right.
And these are all his siblings here.
Yeah.
So assuming either his parents commissioned the portrait of him, perhaps he commissioned it himself, who knows. How did it get from him all the way down to your great-grandmother, Lady Alice Cecil?
Yeah.
Lady Alice Cecil was born in 1867.
Okay.
Penistone Lamb died in 1805.
Yeah.
So this is the gap we need to fill. Now, as you know, great houses and their art collections and all the contents usually pass down to the eldest son. They go down the male line.
Yes.
Now, Penniston Lamb died without children.
Yep.
But, rather sadly, so did George Lamb. William died. Frederick died. All the sons died out, and none of them had any children who survived into adulthood.
Right.
So there was just Emily.
Okay.
From Emily, we've traced a probable route. Emily married Peter Cooper. They had a daughter, Frances, who married Robert Viscount Jocelyn. She became Viscountess Jocelyn, and that's one of the names on the back of our picture. They had a daughter, Edith, who married the 5th Earl of Arran, the name from the catalogue and maybe the second label on the picture.
They had another daughter, Alice Cecil, and that is where it joins up.
Okay. I didn't know about the Coopers or the Gores, so this is opening up a huge amount of family history. But it's really interesting that it comes through the female line all the way through. Yeah.
It does.
And that might be why it's poorly documented as well.
Poorly documented, and so hard to find out because the names change.
Yeah.
And of course the collections get dispersed.
Yeah.
It's a pretty august family, yours, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a pretty impressive family tree.
I'll say.
Now we've got a list of possible names for all the previous owners. There are some good leads to follow.
We can start looking through their wills, start trying to find out more about the contents of their homes, and hopefully find out who the artist was.
While I wait for the technical results, I want to pinpoint a date for our painting. To me, Penniston looks between 15 and 25. This means he could have been painted any time from 1785 to 1795. We know that both Cosway and Lawrence were working around that time. But if we can get a more accurate date, we may be able to link one of them more directly to Penniston. And I've got a hunch that the clothes might help us. I've come to the Victoria and Albert Museum's costume store, where they hold a huge collection of historic clothes. I'm here to meet senior curator Susan North, who's going to try and help me find a match to Penniston's outfit.
We have 2 examples of 18th century coats from the V&A's collection. The blue and green example here shows you what the style of coat would have been in the late 1780s. Single-breasted, you have this very exaggerated curve down the front of the coat there.
That feels very 18th century. I'm thinking, you know, someone like Mozart. You can imagine almost with a bow, can't you? It's a very 18th century look.
Yes.
Straight away, I can see that there are some marked differences to Penniston's coat. So what about the other one?
The new style that comes in is double-breasted. As soon as you're putting one edge of the coat quite far over the other here, you have to accommodate that in the cut. So you start to get this slight cutaway here, and gradually it will become a straight line as you go into the late 1790s and into the early 19th century. This cut also gives you the opportunity of opening out the front of the coat to get this very deep, what we would call a lapel, what they would call reveres.
Penniston's coat is much more in keeping with this later red coat. So can this help the dating of the picture?
The style of the coat and the waistcoat that he's wearing would also suggest early 1790s. Wearing a double-breasted coat, the earliest examples I've seen are about 1790.
That's really helpful. I wasn't aware that we could have such a focused date.
You're welcome.
The clothing suggests the portrait was painted after 1790, so we now need to take a closer look at the lives of both our artists around this time. I've been doing some more research into Mariah Causeway. There isn't a catalogue raisonné for her, but scholars have compiled a list of her known work, and I've come across a worrying gap in her career.
In 1789, Mariah had a baby. Now, we know it was a very difficult pregnancy, and she was very ill after the birth, possibly with postnatal depression. You know, I can only guess at that. But very soon after the birth, she left the country. She went to Italy for 4 years, leaving behind her husband and her tiny baby. And then when she came back, tragically, 18 months later, her young daughter died. But what we can tell from this is that in 1790, there's one painting listed, and then not another one till 1796. So it looks like Mariah didn't pick up a paintbrush in that time. So if she did paint Penistone Lamb, it leaves us a very narrow window of somewhere in 1790. Because after 1796, Penistone is just too old, really, for that portrait.
Meanwhile, with the help of my whippet, Cedric, I'm trying to sniff out what Lawrence was up to at the time. And unlike the less documented Mariah Causeway, there are lots of records to go through. I'm starting with this book of exhibited works at the Royal Academy. It is staggering just how many pictures Sir Thomas Lawrence, as he later became, Tom Lawrence, from the date of 1787, so that's when he's 17 years old, he was exhibiting. I mean, the first one is entitled Mad Girl. But then as we go on, I can see people described like Henry Bunbury, Mr. Dancy. And then from there on, every year, more and more portraits. So I'm going through them now in search of Penistone Lamb. What's very clear is that this teenager hit high society in a big way. Lord Ducey, General Patterson. In 1790, I can see, look, Her Royal Highness, the Prince Emilio. So it wasn't just Queen Charlotte that he was painting, but other members of the royal family. Some actually with just no identifications at all. That's quite exciting. It means we can't rule it out that one of these is Penistone. As the dates get later and later, I'm still drawing a blank. Although a lot of the subjects now are identified by name, I cannot see a Penistone Lamb. But this is interesting. Portraits of a nobleman's children, and then in brackets afterwards, Lord Melbourne. So, Lawrence painted the Melbourne children, just as Mariah Causeway did. And at about the same time, we think the Penistone portrait was painted. This is encouraging. We haven't got the evidence securely that ours is an exhibited picture, but we know he was painting the family. I know Fiona won't find this convincing, but my hunch is, amongst this anonymous bunch of gentlemen, I just have a sense that our Penistone is here.
Philip and I are heading out to compare notes. Although the odds seem to be stacking up against Cosway, not least because of the gap in her career, I think I found something that puts her back in the frame. Philip has suggested tea at an elegant location, but there's a catch.
Philip, if you're going to bring me to Fortnum and Mason's, surely we can at least go in the front entrance.
Well, admittedly, this is the tradesman's entrance, but this was where Thomas Lawrence had his studio. And the glamorous and the great and the good, the sort of Regency equivalent to people like you, would sweep through these doors. Now, the question is, did Penistone Lamb?
Okay.
Lawrence's studio is now home to the upmarket department store and tea shop, Fortnum and Mason. Back in Lawrence's day, it was more easels and oil paint than tea and tiffin, as his prestigious clients sat patiently for their portraits. But Penistone Lamb couldn't have been amongst them, if my latest finding is right.
Do you think you're being a bit quick to dismiss Mariah Causeway? I mean, we think the painting was passed down through the family. So we've looked through all the documents and records associated with the many grand houses that this family inhabited. Now, this was rather interesting. This is a book by Mary Boyle, written in 1885, called Portraits at Panshanger.
Panshanger was one of at least 9 grand houses that the family have owned since Peniston's time. 30 miles north of London, it was home to Emily Lamb, Peniston's sister, and a large collection of art.
So Mary Boyle went round Panshanger, noting what was in it. And she refers to Peniston here, and she says he expired, to the despair of his father, the grief of his whole family, and the deep regret of the county. And then, and this is the important bit, Reynolds, Romney, Mrs. Cosway, and Stubbs were all called on to perpetuate the handsome form and features of this darling of the household. So a list of artists there. Mrs. Cosway is among them. Lawrence is not.
OK, I admit that's good swatting. It's just so frustrating. Every time we get Mariah Causeway out of the picture, she just sort of pops up again. But can I just say again, I don't really think it looks like Cosway. We're still lacking a knockout piece of evidence that proves conclusively that this is by Thomas Lawrence. Mirabelle and I are heading back to the Hamilton Car Institute in Cambridgeshire. Rupert and his team have now subjected Peniston to extensive tests and are ready to share the results. I'm hoping that science will back up my hunch that Lawrence, and not Cosway, is the hand behind this portrait. So, Rupert, have you found anything more that will link this to Lawrence? And I've got to warn you, Mirabelle is tough to convince.
Well, let's see. Here we have your portrait and Queen Charlotte.
Ah, Queen Charlotte in the National Gallery.
Yes.
So a painting by Lawrence done about the same date that Peniston Lamb would have been done?
Yes. We have done an infrared, and we've got from the National Gallery a comparison also done in infrared.
How does Peniston look to you now?
Very old and very dissolute and rather unattractive, I must admit.
But what's really interesting is you see just about there's a sort of halo round the head. Now, if you look very carefully, there's a similar feature around the head in Queen Charlotte. So there's a comparison with working methods there. Maybe he laid in the background, did the head, and then he went on and carried on to do the background to the edges of the canvas.
So you would say that could be a quirk by Thomas Lawrence?
Could be.
The infrared images are really encouraging, but the X-rays could take us deeper into the mysteries of the picture.
Here are X-rays of the head.
That's a cracking comparison.
It's wonderful.
Yes.
And what immediately struck me is this sort of, the liveliness. There's so many brush strokes underneath that you register now very faintly. When you look at the hair, you see hints of this underlying.
But it's wild, isn't it?
It's very wild. And similarly here, it's like a sort of storm of hair.
Do you see
There's
that
a spontaneity in both of them. The hair particularly, and the material around the neck is the same approach, isn't it?
And then you're also getting these little dabs of paint in the background. And look what we've got here, little dabs. They don't make sense. They don't actually show on the surface. No. Now, is he wiping his brush or what? There's something going on, but both of these paintings show these idiosyncratic little outlying brushwork. I've not seen that on many other paintings of this period, and I think that's really is quite a pointer.
Lovely touch, that, isn't it? Yes. We keep on saying he.
Yes, we do, don't we?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay,
yes,
so
we're making assumptions.
Okay, so we found a comparison with a known Lawrence, but why shouldn't this be by Mariah Causeway?
Good question, and unfortunately we don't have comparative X-rays of a Mariah Causeway of the same date that we could say categorically this is so different, but from what I know, looking at the Chatsworth Devonshire painting, she's much more careful. Everything's in the right place, there was no sense of a sort of virtuoso freedom, it was much more controlled.
Well, don't you feel now that your lovely Peniston Lamb must be by the great man?
No, they're both wonderful portraits. I mean, they're just stunning. They're both very sophisticated, and yet they're both spontaneous.
Great, so you agree they're both sophisticated, they're both spontaneous. Why not say they're both by Lawrence?
Yeah, why not? But why do you think that the family has always attributed it to Mariah Causeway? Wasn't she a friend of the family?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, and there's quite a lot of history, it seems. But sometimes these things get confused. And our job is to find out whether through the physical evidence, we can say one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I have to say that's taking us in a bit more of a Lorenthian, as they say, in the art world direction.
Yes, it is. I agree with you.
I've got one last lead to follow from my provenance research. Can we finally pin down this picture? We're back in the grounds of yet another English country house, but this one is particularly special in our story. Clem and I have come to Melbourne Hall in Derbyshire. Nestled in the village of Melbourne, it's where the family's title came from. In 1853, Peniston's sister, Emily Lamb, inherited it.
It's a lovely spot, isn't it?
It is. It's beautiful. You can imagine them riding around here.
Yeah, or the carriages.
Yeah.
The hall is no longer owned by the family, but archives relating to the Melbournes are held at the estate office.
Hello,
Hi there.
pleased to meet you.
Hi, nice to see you.
Go on in.
Thank you.
Philip Heath is the archivist here.
Philip, I can't wait to see what you've got for us.
The main clue is this rather tatty-looking book. I don't know if you can read what it says on the flyleaf.
Book written by
someone,
Mrs. Lamb.
Mrs. Lamb.
About
pictures and books.
Yeah. At Melbourne.
When she and George lived there. Resided there.
So this is Emily, Peniston's baby sister.
Mm.
She's 80 by this time. Her writing's a little bit wobbly, as you can see.
Yeah.
Mrs. Lamb is her sister-in-law, Caroline, married to Emily's brother, George. And George and Caroline lived at Melbourne from 1824 to 34. And while living here, Mrs. Lamb kept this book about the pictures.
Okay.
So if we turn to the relevant page, she goes round the house room by room.
Can you read that? I can't read that.
This is
Library.
really hard to make out.
Oh.
It goes through a lot of paintings that aren't relevant to us. There we go.
Peniston Lamb.
So here's Peniston Lamb. She's put a cross by it. And here, over the door to the hall, William Lamb, Lord Melbourne, and she's put a cross by that as well.
So what do the crosses mean?
If they relate to this on the other side,
okay.
which you might like to read.
Oh, go on, Clem, give it a go.
Okay. These two pictures were done when Peniston and William Lamb were leaving Eton for their tutor, Dr. Longford. At his death, he left them to George Lamb, or his son gave them to him, I forget which.
Oh, yes. So that's who commissioned the painting? The tutor commissioned the painting of Peniston? Or the family could have commissioned them and then given them to the tutor?
Yes.
And then when he died, he bequeathed them back to the family?
Yes.
So if this is our painting, the first owner was Peniston's tutor, rather than the family as we thought. But that doesn't help us with the all-important attribution.
Mrs. Lamb's notebook on the pictures doesn't name the painter. But we do have this other loose leaf that belongs in that volume. In 1858, Emily, Peniston's sister, wants some portraits at Melbourne sent down to Brocket Hall. And I think this list is to see which pictures she wants. And this does name the artist.
OK, so this says over bookcase to the left on Peniston Lamb by Thomas Lawrence.
Oh my God, so this is a fantastic breakthrough because for the first time we have the name Thomas Lawrence attributed to a portrait of Peniston Lamb. And this was for his sister. So that's about as close as we can get.
That's quite touching, isn't it?
It
that
is,
she wanted a picture of her brother even though it was much later.
So when is this dated?
This will be after 1853. I suspect it's from 1858.
Could this be our picture? It certainly fits. Peniston looks around school-leaving age. And if it is, it takes us further back in time, right to Peniston's sister, Emily.
It's just a brilliant step forward, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think it really does change the game.
Completely?
Yeah, yeah.
Well done, you.
Thank you.
Back in London, there's something still bothering me. If the Cosway attribution is wrong, where did it come from in the first place? I've got a theory I want to test on Fiona.
Hello.
Hi there.
furthest we've taken back the Cosway attribution is 1885, and a book by Mary Boyle referencing Penistone Lamb being painted by Mrs. Cosway.
I've been looking at those paintings, all according to her by different artists, and showing Penistone at different ages.
She lists 4 pictures. The first is Penistone and his siblings by Reynolds. Then there's Penistone with his horse, who she says is by Stubbs, but has since been reattributed to Marshall. Then the one by Cosway, which we think is ours. And finally, this one.
So like our painting. It's just like it.
Well, you're right, but Mary Boyle described this as by George Rumney, a painting of Penistone wearing a tawny coat, but it's not. This is a picture that recently emerged in the art world, and it's now been described, quite correctly in my view, as a work by none other, Thomas Lawrence.
The 2 portraits are startlingly similar, not only in composition, but in style and technique. So maybe Mary Boyle got a 3rd attribution wrong.
Well, I see where you're going with this. Out of 4 portraits of Penistone Lamb, Mary Boyle has got the attributions of 2 of them wrong. So could she have got our one wrong as well?
Well, I think we need to think not just about the pictures, but about Mary Boyle as well. Here's a lovely image of her.
Oh, wouldn't mess with her.
No. And she was typical of a certain type of amateur Victorian art historian, very well connected, stomping through the corridors of Britain, but I think got things wrong. We also know by legend that she was a bit short-sighted. Now, add all of that together, and you can see why the attribution gets handed down and myth turns into fact.
Maybe. I mean, it's a bit handy, isn't it, as a theory?
Well, it's a handy theory, but I think that might possibly explain that. But hey, there's so many other things going in our favour. I mean, we have now got a reference to Thomas Lawrence. Add the circumstantial evidence we put together, I think our case is pretty strong.
We brought the portrait back to London and have gathered together all our evidence in a dossier to present to the world's leading experts on Thomas Lawrence. Art historian Brian Allen and former curator at the National Portrait Gallery, Peter Funnell, have come to review the picture. Brian and Peter's word is enough for the market and the art world to accept this as a work by the great portraitist, Sir Thomas Lawrence. It's been so elusive, this painting, because it's come down through the female family line. Every time you think you're following a document trail, it slips through your fingers. And then, of course, there's this Mariah Causeway attribution that has come down through the generations as family folklore. I hope now we've done enough to call that into question.
It seems to me that all the evidence has stacked up. The stylistic nuances, where we compare the strokes on that face with those of other works by Lawrence. And those technical insights, the infrared, the X-ray, how compelling were they? I'm more convinced than ever before that this has to be by Thomas Lawrence.
Hugh, Mirabelle and Clem have come to join us at the gallery to hear the result.
Well, this is the moment then that we will find out. Lawrence or Cosway. What do you think, Hugh? Do you think you'll feel differently about it, one way or the other?
Yes, I think so. I felt slightly irritated by him. He's not really a very beautiful person.
Oh, I think he is.
Do you think he could be more beautiful if you attached the name Lawrence to him?
Yes, I think so.
What about you, Clem?
Well, I think I do see the portrait a bit differently now. I am beginning to see him as kind of a bit more glamorous, actually.
Because he wasn't your type of man to begin with, was he?
No. I don't know if he is still, but...
You've not warmed to the hair?
Not really, no.
Okay. Rather like carpet fluff, I think.
Carpet fluff?
Well, I think wayward and beautiful.
Oh. Okay. And remind us what's at stake here, Philip, value-wise. I mean, Cosway versus Lawrence.
There's a very big difference in value.
If this is by Mariah Causeway, it's still worth a few £1,000s, perhaps £8,000. But in the last few months, auction records have been made. A painting by Thomas Lawrence of Selina Mead, a canvas of exactly this size, made just under £2.3 million.
Heavens.
Now, I don't think he's quite in that category, but I could easily see £500,000 if it's by Lawrence.
I'm gobsmacked.
Peter and Brian have considered all the evidence. It's the moment of truth.
Hello. Peter, Brian, hello.
Good afternoon.
So here's the painting. We're all waiting, aren't we?
Yeah.
Peter, have you reached your verdict?
I thought carefully and looked very hard at the painting. I'm absolutely persuaded that it is by Lawrence, and a very fine example of Lawrence's early work.
Oh, wonderful.
I agree entirely with Peter. Not only is it by Lawrence, but it's an exceptionally good one from that period in his career at the beginning, around 1790, when he really hits the heights. The great portrait of Queen Charlotte in the National Gallery, I think, is about the same date as this, and it's of comparable quality. So it's a really dazzling work, I think.
What do you think?
Well, amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. I feel we've been doing this painting a great disservice over all these years, not knowing that there was this absolute pearl in our midst.
And not just a Lawrence, but a dazzling Lawrence. What do you think?
I know, I'm thrilled, I really am. Bad luck, Mariah Causeway. It really is staggering.
So will you love it now as well?
Yes, we will, we promise.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see it in a totally different light. I mean, and not just because it's more valuable, but because of the whole process of finding out about the man in the picture. It's so fascinating. It's taken us up and down the country and into all these different corners of the family history.
And how do you feel about also having a dazzling piece of art history now in the form of such a rare and important picture?
Well, we'll hang him in a better position, that's for sure. Not in a corner of the room.
And you'll keep it in the family?
I hope so. I would have thought more keep it in the family now. It's so special.
Of all the paintings we've looked at on Fake a Fortune, I think this is one of my absolute favourites. I've really fallen in love with it. And poor old Penniston has languished for so long under the wrong attribution. And it was your spot, your hunch that got us here.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I mean, I can get it wrong as much as I can get it right. But I've always felt with this portrait, on almost every level, that it's delivered. But whatever one thinks oneself, to hear it, as we just have, from voices that one respects, well, it's like being present at a baptism. And the name is Lawrence.